Hello. Last year you might remember that I posted a video about what I called pathways and using pathways as a basis for improvisation through changes. And what I meant by pathways is a sort of template line or backbone, very simple, mostly sort of maybe half notes and whole notes that you could use as a basic skeleton on which to hang your improvisation. And there's a few things that I want a line like that to do, and it's quite closely related, as somebody pointed out, to the idea of using guide tones, but the notes that I use aren't always necessarily the obvious guide tones, which are usually said to be the thirds and sevenths of a chord progression. To me, they're often, but not always, the best choice, so I tend to be a little bit more eclectic in my choices. And it's not necessarily about having a system for doing it, although I will show you one today, but actually having a sense of creativity when you come up with this stuff. There's a few things that I want to do in such a line. I want it to really have something to say about the notes that aren't diatonic to the key. So for many standards you're going to find there are chromatic harmonies, secondary dominants, diminished chords, things like that. That kind of just add something to the sound of the tune. There might have something to do with the melody, or there might be something composed completely fresh. And what I'm going to do today actually is not that much based on the melody, but it's kind of a new melody that you can use. But hopefully we'll have the same kind of integrity as a melody would. You can certainly always use a simplified version of the melody as the guide tone line or the basic template. I'll probably show you how to do that in a video actually. Might be an idea. Okay. So let's start it from a harmonic point of view. I'm going to use the tune Wave, which is an Antonio Carlos Jobim tune. The A section is actually a clever reharmonization of a 12-bar blues, if you look. The main thing to note here is that we end up on a minor chord. We start on a major chord. We're in the key of D, which is not a very usual jazz key, but in Brazilian tunes we're often in sort of more guitar-friendly keys because the guitar is really important in that music. And you'll see that we start off in D major and we end up in D minor. So that's a sort of D Dorian vamp. It's a kind of classic sort of... You know what, we often play it like this. So it's kind of, your classic sort of almost Carlos Santana sort of 2/5 vamp. And you could even take that and just blow over it for an extended period, and it's what people often do when they play this tune. Vamps are often fun and can break up this sort of endless AABA-ness of a standard. But we're going to look at everything apart from those last two bars as being essentially in D major. So the first thing I'm on the lookout for when I construct a guide tone line like this, or a framework line, is really to check out what notes aren't in the key. This is how I do it anyway. So in the case of D major, obviously that's all in the key of D major. Whatever voicing you use, unless you use a Lydian or something. But for a straightforward major sound, obviously that's going to be diatonic to D major. Now the second chord, B flat diminished seventh, has one note that doesn't belong to D major, which is the B flat. Okay, then we go to a 2/5-1 into G, and here we have the note C, which isn't found in D major. Normally it's C sharp in D major. That resolves downward nicely to a B, and then we have this G minor sixth I usually play there, which is a B flat. That's not in the key. And then we have the same note, albeit by a different name, A sharp in the F sharp 7 chord. And then we have another chromatic note, which is D sharp in the B7 chord. And in the E7 chord we have G sharp. And then we go back to A, which is kind of diatonic to D major, but normally I like to play a B flat in there as well, a flat 9. So we're going to really use those notes, and I'll put them up on a manuscript to show you what that is, and I'm also going to write the notes above for people who don't read music fluently, okay, so you can see what those are. Right, so oh, by the way, a good tip with dominant chords that are moving in, and this is a classic back cycling progression, by the way, F sharp, B, E, and if we ignore the B flat 7, which is a substitute for E, the A7, they're all moving in jumps of a fourth, so that's known as a back cycling chord progression. We're going back around the cycle of fifths, and if you don't know the cycle of fifths, get get to know it very well. It's one of the most useful tools you have in understanding standards harmony. Okay, back cycling progressions come up all the time. Anyway, that aside, you'll often find in secondary dominants, so which is dominant chords that don't belong to the key, that the third is often a sharp note in the key, or a natural note if you're in a flat key. So it's often raised up by a half step, or else the as in the case of this, D7 here, you'll find that the seventh is lowered by a half step. So it's usually one of those. You're usually looking out for one of those as being the non-diatonic note. Okay, so our next step is to take this assemblage of notes which kind of jump around. I'll just play them for you. So D. We're going to go to the minor there, I think, on the last chord. It doesn't really sound like a melody. So one thing we can do is try and arrange things so it's a little bit more, has more stepwise movement. This tends to jump around a lot. There are a few movements that creep down by steps or half steps, but I think if we can introduce more of those, it will make it sound more like an actual melodic line. So let's have a go at that. So let's start on the A instead of the D. Let's go to D, and then to C here. And then B flat, that's nice, A sharp, and then we're going to leap up to the seventh, so we're going to use the other guide tone, it's a diatonic note, E, and then we're going back down to A, G sharp, and then down to C sharp for the A, and then, so that will make it sound a lot more melodic, okay? I'll just play that through again. Okay, something like that, right? Now, how do we turn that into an improvisation? Well, there's a few basic embellishments we make. One is obviously rhythmic. So if I sort of start using more interesting rhythms, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that, right? Hopefully you can actually hear the chord progression. I'm deliberately not doing it in the backing track just so you can kind of start to hear how it outlines the harmony, right? Now another thing we can do is we can use chromatic embellishment. So I can sort of add a chromatic half step between two notes that are a step apart, or I can use an enclosure to sort of wrap around notes. Now in general the rules for enclosures are that you want the upper note to be diatonic and the lower note to be chromatic. But if you've got a 3-note enclosure, it's like 2 diatonic notes and 1 chromatic note in the middle somewhere. So I should probably do a video about that, but hopefully this will not be too weird if you've worked with chromatics before. Anyway, let's give it a go. So. So there's a couple of extra notes at the end as well there. And now we can use arpeggios to embellish. So I can use a descending arpeggio of the relevant chord, just to add a little bit of something. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. A bit of repetition there as well. Okay, carrying on. Okay, so obviously getting a little bit more complicated there. Now the other thing you can do is you can move these notes around. You're not limited to having them in the same part of the net. So for instance, the first 2 notes I can change again. Using an arpeggio there. Sorry. So I'm using arpeggios there a little bit more to embellish. By the way, don't feel like once you've got a good solution, like I really like this thing. As a line, I think that's really strong. So I'd probably just use that, not worry too much about it being a little bit of a set piece or a composition. It's fine to work stuff out, especially over a difficult chord progression like that. These... That's quite hard to play over so many dominant chords in a row. I always find that tricky. So having a sort of set pathway or licks that you can embellish over that is certainly not a bad thing. Okay, with that in mind, let's move towards using scales. So in scales, I would generally use the prevailing key. So I'm thinking about D major, and then maybe we'll go to G with that 2/5, thinking about G, then back to D major as well. Again, after that for the F sharp and the B7 and everything, and then back to D Dorian probably for the last 2 bars. So I'm thinking about generalized key centers. Now you could just make up melodies on those and it'll probably sound a lot better than you think. But we can also use scales to run up to those chromatic notes. So for instance, if I want to go to the B flat diminished, the second chord, I can run up a D major scale and go to the B flat. And then run up that G major scale to the G minor, and then if I was playing a D major on F sharp, I would run up to the A sharp. So that'd be something like this, like that, for instance, and then maybe up to the D sharp in this one, and then that's a G sharp in this one. So, and then Dorian at the end, right? So let me just play a solo using this idea and this basic framework. I slightly varied the line in the second one. I started doing this because it just felt right. And then, so that's another chromatic line you could use. In that case, I'm going E flat or D sharp, E, C sharp. You're not limited to using necessarily just that one template. I wanted to talk quickly about how I'd use the melody. So the melody is actually pretty descriptive of the harmony. By the way, I'm not going into the B section. The B section is just 2-2-5-1, so it's relatively simple to play through. Most people should be familiar with that. I'm sort of concentrating on the bit that I think people might find a little bit tricky most of the time. Anyway, so I just wanted to talk about the melody. So, I mean, the 7th is a nice note out there. And then it goes right up the B flat diminished arpeggio. So I think, again, it's B flat. That seems to be like a good abstraction of the melody. So I'm just taking the important notes, what I think are the important notes from the melody. Then it goes. Notice that there's not that much of the chords in there. So if I just play the chords with it. Sorry, let's go back to the on the 9th there, but we're not really playing that note. That's almost like a sort of another line going on below it in the arrangement. And then so I think there, you got. So I mean those notes, and then there's that F sharp on the F sharp 7 chord on D7. So these are really the 2 important notes. And then that note I think is really important there, that F. So maybe I'll be playing something like this. Something like that, right? So that might not sound like the melody, but I think that's the key notes that I would use. So again, it's like, you know, if I was soloing over it, hopefully, I mean, you can hear the identity of the tune enough in there. And it's not just licks, and it's not just sort of me playing all the notes I know, but trying to come up with a line that actually has some integrity to it and also describes the harmony. Yeah, let me know what you think. I want to demonstrate this on a few different tunes, obviously. So if you can sort of make suggestions of tunes you would like me to do this to, then I would be happy to do so if you find this approach useful. Thanks for watching. Please post your ideas below. Bye.